My parents gave my sister a house on her 16th birthday, and on mine, they handed me a $100 bill folded inside a greeting card with a line in my mother's handwriting that said, "It's so you can learn the value of money." I said thank you. I folded the bill in half. I put it in my pocket and smiled at the cake, and nobody at the table, not my father, not my sister, not the two aunts who had driven down from Columbus, said a single word about the difference. I want to tell you something before I go any further back in time. 2 years after that birthday, when I was 18 years old, I bought a house. I paid for it with my own money, every dollar of it, and it was 3 times the size of my sister's house. The day my parents walked through the front door and saw the kitchen, the 9-foot ceilings, the living room with the fireplace and the white mantel, my mother put her hand to her chest like someone had quietly knocked the air out of her lungs. My father stood in the entryway and looked at the staircase. He didn't say anything for a long time. I offered them coffee. I was very calm. I have been very calm for a long time. If you've ever been the child who got the folded bill while the other one got the bow on the car, you already know the specific geography of that table. You know the weight of a room where everyone understands what just happened and nobody is going to say it out loud. If you want to hear how a $100 bill became the most useful thing my family ever gave me, and how I used it in a way they never intended, toward an end they never expected, stay here. Hit subscribe before you go any further, because the chapter that follows what you're about to watch is something I need you here for. And if you grew up as the child who got the practical version of everything, give this a like the moment you recognize yourself in it. Tell me in the comments, did your family ever try to give you a lesson wrapped up as a gift? Because I want to read every single one of those stories. My name is Claire Holloway. I grew up in Carver Falls, Ohio, a town of about 11,000 people with 1 high school, 2 gas stations, a Kroger on Route 9, and a Family Dollar that everyone called simply the Dollar, as if there were no other kind. The house I grew up in had pale yellow aluminum siding that had always been pale yellow, and a maple tree in the front yard that dropped its leaves 2 weeks before any other tree on the street, as if it had somewhere better to be and the street knew it. There were 4 of us: my mother Diane, my father Gerald, my sister Cassidy, who is 3 years older than me, and me. My mother managed the front desk of a dental practice on Elm Street. My father worked in purchasing at a mid-sized manufacturing company outside of town that made specialized components for commercial refrigeration units. They were not rich people. They were not poor people. They were the specific kind of comfortable that has enough to make choices, which is what matters when you're telling a story like this one, because scarcity does not explain what happened in that house. There was enough. The question was always about where enough went, and how the decision about where it went was made, and who got to make it, and whether the making of it was ever acknowledged. Cassidy is 3 years older than me, and blonde in the way that is immediately legible to a room. Not artificially, just constitutionally, the kind of blonde that reads as warmth and ease before a word is spoken. She has my mother's blue eyes and my father's easy laugh, and a quality I have spent a long time trying to find the right word for, and the word I keep coming back to is assumption. She assumes the world is arranged in her favor, and this assumption is so complete and so genuinely unexamined that the world, more often than not, simply agrees with her. She walks into rooms, and rooms rearrange themselves around her comfort. She is not cruel. I want to be very clear about this. Cassidy is not a cruel person. She is a person who received so much unexamined, reflexive, unconditional love for so long that she never had occasion to examine it. She would probably be surprised, genuinely surprised, if you told her the specific inventory of what I'm about to tell you. She would probably say she didn't know, and I think that would mostly be true. The people who benefit most from an unequal system are almost never the architects of it. They're just the ones who live on the better floor and never have to think about the construction. My partner Marcus has been in my life since I was 17, and he is the opposite of a complicated person in the same way that a clear window is the opposite of a dirty one, not because clarity is easy to maintain, but because it's the natural state he returns to when left alone. He is honest with the ease that tall people are tall, constitutionally, without effort, in a way that makes other people feel their own small dishonesties more acutely, simply by contrast. Marcus believed, and for a long time I thought he was right, that I should talk to my parents directly and plainly about the pattern I had been living inside. He thought honest communication was the tool. He was patient about it. He waited for me to try it. I tried it twice, in different years, in different ways, with different degrees of precision, and both times the conversation ended in the same place. My mother explaining that things were the way they were for reasons that made sense to her, and my father looking at his hands, and the pattern unchanged. After the second time, I told Marcus I had decided on a different approach. He looked at me and said, "Okay." That was it. No argument, no speech, no list of concerns. He accepted the conclusion I had reached, and he stood beside it. That is what Marcus does. My grandmother, Evelyn, my mother's mother, lived in Millbrook, a town 40 minutes from Carver Falls, in a small house that smelled permanently of coffee and cedar, and something warm and mineral that I have never been able to name but that I associated, from the time I was very small, entirely with the feeling of safety. Evelyn was a quiet woman in the specific way that observant people are quiet, not because they have nothing to say, but because they are spending the energy elsewhere. She watched things. She watched people. She had the eyes of someone who had been watching for a long time and had learned to be careful about what she said about what she saw, not because she was afraid of consequences, but because she was strategic about timing. She drove a 12-year-old Buick and had strong opinions about bread and kept very few other opinions where anyone could find them without invitation. The rule in our house, when it came to birthday parties, was that parties, real parties, with guests and games and anything that required renting a space or hiring someone, were for children under 12. My mother announced this policy when Cassidy turned 12. Cassidy cried a little, received a consolation dinner at the nicer restaurant in town, and the policy was established. I was 9 when the policy was established. I heard it, I noted it, I accepted it, the way children accept things that are stated by adults as facts. I turned 12 in March of the year Cassidy was 15. My mother made a chocolate cake from a box with store-bought frosting, the kind that tastes like sugar and nothing else, and we had dinner at the kitchen table. Me, my parents, Cassidy, and Grandma Evelyn, who drove up from Millbrook with a card that had $40 in it and who squeezed my shoulder and said, low enough that only I could hear, "You notice more than they think you do." I didn't know exactly what she meant at the time. I stored it, the way I stored a lot of things, carefully in a place I could find again later. That July, Cassidy turned 15. My mother drove her and 6 friends to a rented hall on the other side of town, where there were catered appetizers, small things on small plates, the kind that take effort, and a DJ playing the same 30 songs in rotation, and a cake from the bakery downtown with Cassidy's name written in pink frosting across the top. There were photos. There are still photos, or there were, framed in the living room for years afterward. Cassidy with her arms around her friends in front of the backdrop my mother had ordered online. Everyone laughing, everyone lit the way you're lit when someone put thought into the lighting. When I asked my mother, the week after Cassidy's party, what had happened to the rule about parties being for children under 12, asked it plainly, the way a 12-year-old asks things, my mother looked at me with the particular calm of a person who has already decided the conversation is not one they need to have seriously. She said, with complete equanimity, "Cassidy is at a special age." I was 12, and I was already old enough to understand that sentence. It meant, this rule was mostly for you. The rule appeared fair. It was stated neutrally. It applied completely and consistently to one of us and bent, without explanation, whenever it became inconvenient for the other. This is how the rules worked in our house. There was the rule about brand name clothing being too expensive. We shop at outlets, we're practical people. That applied to my wardrobe completely, and to Cassidy's approximately 60% of the time. The other 40 being explained by specific circumstances that were always mysteriously present when Cassidy needed them, and always mysteriously absent when I did. There was the rule about school trips. Approved case by case, based on educational merit, budget permitting. My 8th grade science trip to the Natural History Museum in Columbus was declined because it was $40 and gas was expensive that month. Cassidy's sophomore trip to Washington, D.C. was approved, and my mother slipped $50 into her backpack the morning she left. Money I happened to see being folded and tucked because I was standing in the hallway and my mother didn't hear me come downstairs. There was the rule about curfew, 11 o'clock, applying to both of us, except that Cassidy had stopped being asked when she was back by 11 by the time she was 16, and I was still being texted at 10:50 asking my ETA when I was 19. Rules were my mother's favorite tool. They looked like fairness. They sounded like principles. The problem was that in practice, in actual application to actual events, they were mostly for me. I don't say this with the bitterness of someone who has spent years in the same place, going over the same ground. I say it with the specific calm of someone who spent years cataloging rather than festering. There is an important difference between bitterness and clarity. Bitterness is about wanting things to have been different. Clarity is about understanding precisely what they were. I chose clarity because clarity was more useful. Clarity eventually paid for a house 3 times the size of my sister's. Let me tell you about Cassidy's 16th birthday, because the 16th birthday is where the story accelerates. My parents had been talking about it for roughly 6 months in the way adults talk about a surprise they're excited to give, in front of the person it's for, with a not quite convincing performance of secrecy that communicates chosen, anticipated, valued, all without technically saying it. My mother would lower her voice when a specific phone call came in. My father came home one evening with a folder from First National Bank and spent an hour at the kitchen table with a calculator. And when I walked through to get a glass of water, he covered the folder with the newspaper, not meanly, just automatically, the way you'd cover a wrapped present. On the morning of Cassidy's birthday, my father drove her to the driveway with a dish towel over her eyes. A dish towel, specifically the blue striped one from the hook beside the stove, which is the kind of detail you remember because it is so specific to your particular family's particular house. When my father lifted the towel, there was a car. A 2007 Honda Civic in silver, with 42,000 miles on it, and a full tank of gas, and an arterial red bow on the roof, the kind of bow that appears in movies and in certain lucky childhoods. Cassidy screamed. My mother was crying with one hand over her mouth. My father was laughing. I was standing in the open doorway in my socks with a glass of orange juice, watching the entire thing, and I made a decision in that moment. Not a dramatic decision, not a cinematic decision, just a quiet, private, completely internal decision. I am watching this. I will continue to watch. I will not say anything because nothing useful can be said right now, and the practice of not saying the useless thing is something I have been working on for years. 2 years later, when I turned 16, I woke up on a Tuesday morning to a birthday card propped against the sugar bowl on the kitchen table. Inside was $100, folded once, and a line in my mother's handwriting. It's so you can learn the value of money, Claire. We love you. Happy birthday. Through the kitchen window, I could see Cassidy's silver Civic in the driveway. I read the card. I folded the bill. I said thank you at dinner. I put the card in the second drawer of my desk, where I kept things I needed to not lose and not look at often. And I thought about the value of money in a way my mother had not intended me to think about it. I thought, this is the most honest thing they have ever said to me. Not because the lesson was the right one, but because it was accurate. They had been teaching me the value of money for years, through every store-bought cake and declined school trip and rule that applied to me and bent for everyone else. They had been teaching me that money was the thing I needed to be careful with, to earn, to keep, to protect. They just didn't know I had been listening. I need to tell you about how money worked in our house, because the money is the mechanism that makes everything else make sense. It is not just backstory, it is the engine. From the time I was 13, I worked. This is not an unusual thing to say, and I don't say it to make you think I was exceptional. I say it because the specific shape of the work and what I did with the money from the work is where the real story is. At 13, I babysat for 3 families on our block and the street adjacent. The Kowalski kids on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, the Flanagan toddler on Saturday mornings, and on a regular call for the Ng family whenever they had a conflict. I charged $4 an hour, which was the going rate in Carver Falls for a 13-year-old with no formal references. And I was reliable, and I showed up on time, and I knew how to handle the Kowalski 6-year-old who was frightened of loud sounds, and the Flanagan baby who would only sleep if you walked a specific figure-8 path through the kitchen and the hallway. I kept a notebook. Date, family, hours, amount, monthly total at the bottom of each page in red pen. At 14, I raised my rate to $6 an hour because I had been doing this for a year, and I had 3 households who would vouch for me, and I was not, by that point, the cheapest option in the neighborhood, but I was clearly the most reliable, and parents who have discovered reliable childcare will pay $1 extra per hour without blinking. At 15, I added a second job, which was helping my neighbor Mr. Castellano, a widower in his late 70s who had a hip that was unreliable on uneven surfaces, with his grocery shopping at the Kroger on Route 9 every Saturday afternoon, and his yard work on whatever Saturday mornings the weather cooperated with. He paid me $40 flat for the combined work, which was more than I could have made anywhere else in town at 15, and in exchange I pushed his cart through the grocery store and listened to him talk about his late wife Frances, who had apparently been an extraordinary cook and a card player of such strategic subtlety that people had stopped inviting her to poker nights, because it stopped being fair. I genuinely liked Mr. Castellano. He talked to me the way adults rarely talk to teenagers, which was as if I were a person with a full future ahead of me that he expected to hear about. When I told him what I was saving toward, he said, "Good. Property is what stays. Everything else moves." At 16, 11 days after the birthday card, I opened a savings account at the First National branch on Elm Street. The account was in my name, Claire Holloway. The opening deposit was $842, of which exactly $100 had come from the birthday card. I stood at the teller's window while the transaction processed and thought, the value of this $100 is not what you intended it to be. It is the first stone in something you will not see coming. I want to tell you about the afternoon that I believe sent my grandmother to a real estate office, because this is the part of the story that isn't mine alone. I was 13, 2 weeks into 7th grade, and the school had introduced a new extracurricular eligibility rule. Students needed to maintain a B average or above to participate in after-school programs. This seemed fair to me. It was stated as a rule. I maintained a B+ average, and I had signed up for the science club, which met on Wednesday afternoons in the chemistry classroom, and which I genuinely wanted to attend because the teacher, Mr. Pemberton, talked about chemistry the way some people talk about a place they love. 2 weeks in, I discovered that a student named Tyler, whose parents I knew my mother was vaguely social with through the PTA, was participating in the school drama program despite a C+ average that was publicly known because Tyler had complained about it in the lunchroom more than once. I asked Ms. Brennan, the club coordinator, how this was possible given the rule. Ms. Brennan looked at me with the expression of an adult who knows the answer and has decided she cannot be the one to give it. She said, "There are exceptions made on a case-by-case basis." I said, "For what criteria?" She said, "It varies." I thanked her and went home. I told my mother about it that evening. She said, with genuine equanimity, the kind that comes not from indifference but from having already decided the conversation is a category of things she doesn't engage with, "Those things happen, Claire. It's really not your situation to worry about." I asked, with what I thought was reasonable logic, whether exceptions might be made for other students as well if situations arose. She looked at me as if I had asked something that didn't quite make sense in the grammar of the house we lived in. She said, "That's not really how it works." She went back to her dinner. That Saturday, I was at Evelyn's. I helped her with the dishes after lunch, and we sat at the table with coffee. She always gave me coffee, milky and with a lot of sugar, from the time I was 11, because she said coffee at a table is the beginning of an honest conversation. And she asked me how school was going. I told her about the rule and Tyler and Ms. Brennan and my mother's response. Not dramatically. Just in order, the way I've always narrated things to Evelyn, as a series of facts that I trusted her to understand without me having to point to the meaning. She listened to all of it with her hands around her mug. When I finished, she said, "Do you know what the difference is between you and Tyler?" I said I didn't. She said, "Someone is watching out for Tyler." She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "I'm going to watch out for you." I filed it away as the kind of thing people who love you say, a promise of attention, an expression of loyalty. I thanked her and helped her carry the mugs to the sink. She went to a real estate office in Millbrook the following Monday. I didn't know this until 4 years later. Here is what she did. She contacted a real estate agent she had used once before, a woman named Patricia Slade, and asked to see small residential properties in Millbrook and the surrounding towns, properties that were affordable, livable, and rentable. She looked at 4 houses over 2 weekends. She chose the one on Linden Street in Millbrook. 3 bedrooms, a fenced yard that needed work, a kitchen that hadn't been touched since the early 90s, a 2-car garage in better condition than the rest of the house. Listed at $48,000. She paid in cash. She paid from her retirement savings. She put the deed in my name, Claire Holloway. She did not tell my mother. She did not tell my father. She did not tell anyone in the family. She found a property management company, arranged for the house to be rented, and opened a separate savings account also in my name, into which she directed the rental income every month. She put the deed in her purse, her large tan leather purse that she had owned since before I was born, and that contained at any given moment what appeared to be the complete contents of a small organized office. And she kept it there for 4 years, waiting. She was waiting, she told me later, until I was old enough to understand what to do with it. I was 17, on the Saturday after my birthday, when she showed me. My parents were at an event at the dental office. Cassidy was out with friends. Evelyn had driven up in the Buick, and we were sitting at the kitchen table with coffee, and she asked me, in the direct way she reserved for specific moments, what I was planning to do. Not with my birthday weekend, with my life. Where was I going? What was I building? I told her about the savings account at First National. I told her the balance, which had grown by that point to $4,300. $312. I told her the goal, which I described as accurately as I could. Something with my name on the deed, something I owned outright or very nearly, before I was 20. I said 20 because I needed a number, and 20 felt like a real challenge I could believe in, rather than a fantasy I was using to make myself feel better. She listened. She opened her purse. She set a folded document on the table and pushed it across to me. I unfolded it. It was a property deed. The address was on Linden Street in Millbrook. The name on the deed was Claire Holloway. I looked up at her. She was watching me with an expression I had never seen on her face in 17 years, which was the expression of someone who has been carrying a weight for a significant time and has just set it down in the right place. She told me everything: the real estate office, the cash payment, the rental management, the waiting. She handed me a passbook from the savings account she had opened in my name. The balance was $11,240. 4 years of rental income, managed in my name, never touched. I held the deed in both hands for a while. I don't know how long. Evelyn finished her coffee. I started crying, which I had not done about any of this. Not the birthday card, not Cassidy's car, not any of the years of rules and exceptions and store-bought cakes. For a very long time. She put her hand over mine on the table. She said, "Actions on paper. That's what changes things." Then she said, "You were always worth it, Claire." Using my full name the way she did when she wanted me to hear something completely. I heard it. I have kept hearing it since. The Linden Street house was my foundation. What I did with it over the following 12 months is the architectural part of this story. I was 18 when I started looking in earnest. I spent 4 months on real estate listings the way other people spend time on anything they need to understand thoroughly before they act. Every night after work, on my laptop at the kitchen table while Marcus made dinner, cross-referencing square footage and school districts and comparable sales and the repair histories that diligent sellers disclose and careless ones don't. I brought Marcus with me to the serious viewings. I brought Evelyn to 2 of them. She stood in the kitchens with her arms crossed and her eyes moving across the ceilings and the baseboards, and she said, after the second one, "You'll know the right one when you see it." She was right. The house in Granville was listed on a Thursday, and I saw it the following Saturday morning. It was in a neighborhood of mature trees and quiet streets and neighbors who kept their lawns trimmed without it becoming a statement. The house was built in 1968 and had been owned by one family for 30 years before being sold to a couple who had spent the next decade updating it. New kitchen with quartz counters and a farmhouse sink, and a window above the sink that looked directly into the backyard at an oak tree the listing said was 42 years old. Refinished hardwood floors, 9-foot ceilings. A primary bedroom with windows on 3 sides that caught light in the afternoon at an angle that made the room feel like it was thinking. A detached garage, a fireplace in the living room with a white painted mantel, and empty bookshelves on either side waiting to be filled. It was listed at $168,000. I offered $161,500. The sellers accepted the same afternoon. The closing was on a Tuesday in October. I sat at the closing table and signed document after document, and when I reached the final one, the deed, with the property address and the purchase price and the name of the owner typed in clean black text, I saw Claire Holloway on the line, and I felt something I have not found a precise word for in the years since. Not triumph, which is too loud, not relief, which is too passive, something quieter and more complete than either. The sensation of a thing landing exactly where you aimed it, after a very long and careful throw. I called my parents that evening from the driveway of the Granville house with the key in my hand. My mother asked if I was joking. My father said, "What do you mean, bought a house?" I gave them the address. I told them I'd like them to come see it on Saturday, if they wanted to. They came on Saturday. Cassidy came with them, which I had not expected but did not mind. I had coffee ready and a simple breakfast on the kitchen counter, and Marcus was at the table, calm and unhurried, a cup in both hands, his presence in the room doing exactly what his presence always does, communicating, without a word, that everything here is exactly as stable as it looks. My mother walked through the front door first. She stopped in the entryway. The ceilings were 9 feet, and the morning light was coming through the living room windows at a low autumn angle, crossing the hardwood floors, and the fireplace with the white mantel was visible from where she stood. She put her hand against her sternum, flat-palmed, the gesture of someone absorbing an impact they weren't braced for. She said nothing for a moment. My father came in behind her and looked at the staircase. He looked at it the way I had looked at Cassidy's car in the driveway 2 years earlier, with a stillness that was not calm but was the thing just before either calm or collapse. He didn't speak. Cassidy came in last and walked slowly through the living room and ran her hand along the empty bookshelves and turned to look at me and said, simply and entirely, "Claire, this is beautiful." She said it the way you say a true thing, without any other layer underneath it, and I believed her completely. And I said thank you, and I handed her a cup of coffee. My mother found her voice after what felt like a long time, but was probably 90 seconds. She said, "How did you do this?" And I told her. I told her about the babysitting at 13, Mr. Castellano and the groceries, and Francis, the extraordinary card player, the ice cream shop my junior year at 3 evenings a week and Sunday afternoons, the savings account at First National with the first deposit of $842, of which exactly 100 had come from my birthday card. I told her about Grandma Evelyn. I watched her face do something complicated when I said Grandma Evelyn. She turned to look at my father. He was still looking at the staircase. "Your grandmother knew about this?" my mother said. "For 4 years," I said. The silence after that sentence was the kind of silence that happens when a piece of information restructures something large. Not an angry silence, a structural one. My father turned from the staircase and looked at me. He is not, as I've said, a man of excess words or easy emotion, and what I saw in his face was not a simple thing. It was a complicated thing, something close to regret, something close to awe. And underneath both of those, the specific discomfort of a person who is understanding for the first time the full weight of something they had allowed themselves to believe was small. He said very quietly, "We didn't know, Claire." I said, "I know you didn't." Marcus got up and offered to refill everyone's coffee. This is one of the things I love about Marcus. The weeks that followed were complicated, which I had anticipated. My mother called several times with questions that were really attempts to understand a version of me she had been maintaining in her mind that had just turned out to be incorrect. The version she had been maintaining was the practical one, the low-maintenance one, the one who received $100 on her birthday and absorbed it without consequence and went on being uncomplicated. She was not wrong that I was practical. She was wrong about what the practicality was for and what it had been building toward. The wider family, which in our case meant my mother's sister Barbara in Cleveland, and Barbara's son Derek, and 2 or 3 family friends who had become, over the years, embedded in the family's information network, responded in waves. Barbara called first, the very next week, to ask whether I understood what I had done to my mother's nerves. She delivered this inquiry at considerable volume over about 4 minutes, and when she finished, I said, "Barbara, I bought a house with my own money. What specifically concerns you?" There was a pause of some length. She said, "You could have told them you were doing this." I said, "I bought a property with my savings. Was I required to inform them?" Another pause. She moved on to the suggestion that I had deliberately humiliated my sister, which was such a specific misreading of events that I almost admired its architectural precision. Cassidy, I told her, had been to my house twice since the visit and had helped me hang curtains in the bedroom. This was true, and Barbara did not have a response to it. Derek called 2 days after Barbara, in a completely different register. He asked simply, "Are you okay?" I said I was. He said, "Good. What you did, the whole thing, not just the house, but all of it, the years of it, it's remarkable." He said it simply, as a statement of fact, the way you state a thing when you've thought about it and decided to say the true version rather than the approved version. I told him I appreciated it. I meant it. There is a specific kind of value in someone from inside the situation, confirming, without being asked, that what you observed was real and not a projection of personal grievance. It doesn't change anything, but it settles something. Derek and I have always been more honest with each other than the family generally allows. He grew up on the outside of a different system, his mother Barbara's particular version of the same logic, where his younger brother got the attention, and Derek got the assumption that he was fine without it, because he was athletic and sociable, and therefore his needs were self-evidently met. He recognized what I was describing because he had been inside a version of it. The difference between his situation and mine is that he never built anything from it. He left for Cleveland at 22 and built distance instead of property, which is another valid response to the same set of conditions and which serves him well. He is happy, I think, in the specific way that people are happy when they have stopped requiring understanding from the people who were never capable of it. He said before we got off the phone, "Evelyn always had a plan, didn't she?" I said yes. He said, "I thought so. She looked at you different." I asked what he meant by different. He said, like you were a project, the good kind. I laughed, actually laughed, the first time I had laughed about any of this, and Derek laughed too. And we talked for another 20 minutes about things that had nothing to do with the house at all. And when I hung up, I felt the specific relief of being known by someone in your family in a way that goes past the story they decided to tell about you. There was, in the third week after my parents' visit, an invoice. I use the word invoice precisely because that is what it was. A document with a letterhead and an amount due. It arrived at my Granville address, which means my mother had given my address to someone, which I noted, on a Tuesday morning from the Carver Falls Community Center, addressed to Claire Holloway, for the amount of $1,200. The description read, Holloway Household, Outstanding Pledge, Riverside Park Renovation Fund, 2019. I held the document for approximately 60 seconds, waiting for it to produce a context that would make it make sense. It didn't. I called the number on the letterhead. I spoke with a woman named Patricia Oakes, who had the voice of a person who has been put in the middle of something they did not choose and are handling with professional grace. I explained that I had not signed any pledge, had not authorized any contribution, and had not been living in the Holloway household in 2019 in any capacity that would make me financially responsible for a pledge made by another member of the household. She said she would look into it. She called back the following morning to confirm that the pledge was associated with the household address, not with my signature, and that my name would be removed from the account immediately. She apologized, with the specific precision of someone apologizing for a thing they personally didn't do, but entirely understood. I thanked her. I sat with the invoice for a little while after hanging up. Not with anger. By that point, anger was not a useful condition, and I had largely stopped entertaining it. With a kind of quiet, functional clarity about what the invoice represented, which was this. Somewhere in the chain between my mother and that letterhead, someone had assumed that my name meant obligation, that the word Holloway, associated with Claire, meant money would come, that my practicality, my reliability, my 17 years of absorbing without complaining was a resource that extended forward in time indefinitely. This is why they liked the arrangement. I hadn't signed anything. I had never signed anything. I had simply been present in a situation where my compliance was assumed, and the assumption had been so persistent and so consistent that it had calcified into a kind of debt that existed only in one direction. Removing my name from the account was, in its small and administrative way, the same gesture as canceling the arrangement. I did not owe them my compliance. I never had. That had always been the truth. It was simply that nobody had bothered to write it down. 6 months after the visit, the house had settled into itself the way houses do when they are being lived in, rather than merely occupied. I had painted the hallway a warm white that wasn't quite white, more the color of paper that's been in the sun for a season, and Marcus had built the bookshelves in the living room himself, not the ones that came with the house. Those were fine, but a second set in the study, floor to ceiling, with a rolling ladder that he found at an estate sale and stripped and re-oiled until it moved on its track like it had been built for that exact room. The kitchen got new hardware on the cabinets, brushed brass, which sounds like a small thing and is a small thing, and nonetheless makes me stop and notice it every time I open a drawer. We replaced the light fixture above the kitchen table, the old fluorescent tube that made everything look like a gas station, with a pendant lamp in smoked glass that casts the kind of light that makes dinner feel like an event. I tell you these things because they are the evidence of a specific phenomenon that is hard to describe in abstract. What happens to a house when nobody in it is carrying debt they didn't incur? Not financial debt, though that changes things too, but the other kind. The social debt of showing up and absorbing and not complaining, because the alternative is to be called difficult, which is the word families use for people who name what's happening. We were not carrying that kind of debt. The house knew. The child in this story is, technically, not a child, but the teenager version of Cassidy, who was 19 when my parents came to visit, and who I watched over the course of that year do the bravest and most ordinary thing, begin to understand a system she had benefited from without being its architect. Cassidy is not quick to land on insight. She arrives at things slowly, the way water arrives at the lowest point of a landscape, without hurrying, without drama, eventually and completely. By November of that year, she had arrived somewhere. I could see it in how she sat when we were together, less like someone in the center of a room and more like someone choosing where to stand. It's a subtle difference. It matters. My parents came back to the Granville house in December, without Cassidy this time, and sat at my kitchen table while the oak tree in the backyard held its last leaves against a gray Ohio afternoon. My father had been quieter than usual since October. I understood this as the behavior of a man who processes conclusions slowly and completely, who carries them inside for a long time and doesn't offer them until he is certain they are true, and that he can say them without falling apart. He was approaching certainty about something, and I could see the approach in the specific quality of his quietness. My mother had brought a photo album. This was unexpected. She set it on the table between her coffee and mine and opened it to a page in the middle and pointed to a photograph of a girl in a yellow dress at a birthday party. The girl was smiling the specific formal smile of a child who has been instructed to smile. Beside her was an older girl in blue, laughing at something outside the frame. My mother said, "That's me. I turned 9 that day." She pointed to the girl in blue. "That's Carol." Carol was her older sister, who lived in Phoenix now and whom we saw every few years, and who had, as far as I knew, always had an easier relationship with my grandparents than my mother had. My mother looked at the photograph for a moment and then said, "Carol got the party with the DJ and the friends and the rented hall. I got the dinner at the kitchen table with the cake from a box." She said it evenly, without drama, but her hands were flat on the table, pressed down, the way hands go flat when they are holding something. My father looked at the photograph and then at the tablecloth. I waited. My mother said carefully, "I think I thought that was what we were supposed to do. That the younger one got the practical version and the older one got the real version. I thought that was a rule that made sense." She paused. "I don't think I actually thought about it very much at all. And not thinking about it is probably the thing I should have done differently." She looked up at me. "I'm sorry, Claire. I'm not sure I know exactly how to say that right, but I want to say it." It was not a formal apology in the way formal apologies are delivered in movies. The exact words, the full catalog of specific wrongs, the tears. What it was rarer than that. It was a person arriving voluntarily at the place where the truth lives, not because they had been cornered there, not because the alternative had become impossible, but because they had walked there under their own power and sat down. I have thought about this since, about the difference between a formal apology and a true one, and I have come to believe the formal one is actually easier. The formal one has a script. The true one requires you to just say the thing. I said, "I believe you, and I know that doesn't undo what happened, but I think it matters that you're saying it." My father looked up from the tablecloth. He said, "You built something real, Claire." He said my name the way he used to say it when I was small, with the weight on the second syllable, and I thought of the 9-year-old at the kitchen table with the store-bought frosting cake watching the rule about parties get explained. And I thought, she would not have believed this afternoon. She would have thought you were describing someone else's story. We sat for another hour. The conversation was not perfectly comfortable, which is fine, because comfort is not what I was after. Honesty is more useful and harder and takes longer to achieve. We were achieving it slowly, at a kitchen table in Granville, with the oak tree in the backyard, losing the last of December's leaves. My mother began seeing a therapist in January of the following year, a fact she mentioned on the phone with the studied casualness of someone who wants to say the thing but does not want to make a production of it. I told her I thought that was a good decision, and I meant it without performance. The dynamic between her and Cassidy, which has never been my primary concern but which I have watched from the edges, has shifted in ways I don't fully understand and don't feel I'm entitled to analyze. I know that Cassidy and my mother have had at least one difficult conversation that I was not part of and was not told the details of. I know that my mother has stopped doing the thing where she explains Cassidy's needs as self-evidently more pressing than anyone else's. I know this because I've been at the table enough times since to notice the difference. Cassidy and I are fine. We are genuinely fine. Not fine in the family sense where that word means we have agreed not to mention things. We had one real conversation, parked outside the coffee shop on Main Street in Carver Falls on an evening in late summer, with the windows down and the engine off, and neither of us quite ready to get out of the car. She said, "I didn't know you were struggling." I said, "I wasn't struggling. I was building." She looked at me, and I could see her processing this distinction, the way it changed the shape of the last several years. She said, "I should have seen it." I said, "You weren't looking in that direction." I said it without accusation, because I don't believe in accusation when the truth is more interesting. She wasn't looking because nobody ever required her to look in that direction. The people who receive everything freely are not required to notice the architecture that makes their freedom possible. That is a condition of getting everything. The noticing is someone else's job. Now she knows it. I have a rule for my conversations with my parents. One rule, stated simply and applied consistently. If a conversation begins to move back toward the old logic, toward a comparison, toward an implicit accounting of who has what and how it is divided and whether I am grateful enough for my portion, I say one sentence: I'm going to stop you there. Just that. The first time I said it, my mother went quiet and then changed the subject, and I understood she had heard me. The second time, which came about 4 months later, was softer, an almost comparison wrapped in what might generously be called a compliment. And I said it again, the same sentence, same tone, no elaboration. She said, okay. Then the conversation that followed was different. Not perfect, not a transformation, different, in the specific way that things are different when one clear limit has been drawn and held. Different is enough. Different is what you build toward when you have stopped mistaking a finished renovation for a teardown. My grandmother Evelyn died in the spring of my 21st year, in March on a Wednesday morning, in her house in Millbrook, the Cedar and Coffee House. I drove down that afternoon and sat in her kitchen for a while, and the smell was still there, the unnamed mineral warmth of it, and her purse was on the chair where she always kept it. The deed to the Linden Street property was still in the purse, alongside a folded copy of the savings passbook. I have the purse. It's on the top shelf of the closet in the bedroom of the Granville house, behind a box of winter sweaters, and sometimes when I'm looking for something else, I see the top of it and I stop for a second. Just a second. Then I find what I was looking for. On my desk at the property management company where I work, handling residential accounts across 4 counties, on track to have my broker's license in 14 months, there is a birthday card. The card from my 16th birthday, with the line in my mother's handwriting about the value of money. The $100 bill is not in it. The $100 is somewhere in the compound interest of 11 years of deliberate decisions, in the hardwood floors of the Granville house and the farmhouse sink and the quartz countertops and the oak tree in the backyard and the bookshelves on either side of the white mantel that are now fully filled with books I chose because I wanted them. The card is on my desk because it is the most accurate document my family ever produced about who they thought I was and what they thought I was worth. I keep it not out of bitterness, and I want to be precise about this because the distinction matters. Bitterness would require spending energy on the past, and I have too many better things to spend energy on. I keep it because it is a receipt. A very precise record of a moment when someone's misunderstanding of me became the precise engine of everything I then built. I want to speak to you directly now, because I think some of you know what I'm describing in a way that goes well past the specific story of a car and a house and a birthday card. If you were the child in your family who got the practical version of everything, the bus pass when your sibling got the car, the grocery store cake when your sibling got the catered party, the small bedroom with the crack in the ceiling that nobody ever fixed, the hand-me-down coat while the new one went somewhere else, the compliment that was really an explanation for why you needed less attention, I want to say something to you very directly. You didn't need less. You needed exactly what everyone else needed. The difference is that getting it from the right people was not available to you, and so you found other ways. You always found other ways. I don't say this as a compliment in the way "you're so strong" is a compliment, which is to say, not really a compliment at all, but an excuse dressed as praise. Being strong was not a choice you made. It was a condition of your environment. But the intelligence you developed inside that environment, the watching, the cataloging, the reading of patterns, the quiet and patient and absolutely deliberate building, that is yours, completely, permanently, in a way that nobody gave you and nobody can take. You were not hard to love. You were easy to overlook. Those are not the same thing, and I want you to hear that distinction clearly, because I spent years not hearing it, years in which I accepted easy to overlook as a description of something true about me, rather than a description of something limited in the people doing the looking. There was a woman in her late 60s who looked at me and put $48,000 of her retirement savings behind the looking, and who kept a deed in her purse for 4 years, and who said when she finally handed it to me, "You were always worth it." She said it in a kitchen that smelled like cedar and coffee and something warm and unnamed. If you haven't had someone say that to you yet, if you are still waiting for someone in your particular situation to say the true thing clearly, let me say it to you here. You were always worth it. What you built with what you were given, however far along you are, however much distance remains between where you are and where you're going. The building was not a consolation prize. The building was the point. You were paying attention when others weren't, and what you constructed with that attention is yours. Evelyn bought a house on Linden Street and kept the deed in her purse for 4 years. My parents gave me $100 bill and a line about value. I am 31 years old. I own 2 houses. The Linden Street property, which is currently occupied by a young couple who keep the yard beautifully and who sent me a card at Christmas, and the Granville house, which is mine, which has the oak tree and the farmhouse sink and the bookshelves full of books. I have a job I built from the first day and a broker's license I'm 14 months from completing, and a partner who is constitutionally honest, and a kitchen that gets afternoon light in a way that makes me stop sometimes just to look at it. I drive a 2021 Subaru Outback in magnetite gray that I paid for in cash, because cash is what happens when you have been learning the value of money since you were 9 years old, and someone forgot to account for what you might do with the lesson. The car is not the point of the story. The car is the receipt. A few months ago, I was sitting in the Subaru in the parking lot after a long day, and I had the birthday card on the passenger seat because I'd moved it off my desk while the office was being cleaned. The sun was at the October angle, low and gold, specific to Ohio in autumn, in a way that feels like a particular kind of honesty, and I picked up the card and read the line in my mother's handwriting one more time. "It's so you can learn the value of money, Claire." I sat with it for a moment, with the oak tree waiting at home, and the deed filed at the county office and the bookshelves full, and Evelyn's purse on the closet shelf. Then I thought about what I would say to the 16-year-old at the kitchen window, watching the red bow on someone else's car in the driveway. I would say, "You already know exactly what this is worth. You have always known. Go find out what you can build with it." The answer, it turns out, is quite a lot. I want to hear from you now. Tell me in the comments. If you grew up as the child who got the practical version, what did you do with it? What did you build? And if you're still in the middle of the building, if you're still at year 1 or year 3 and you can't see the house yet, I want to hear that too. I read every comment. I mean that. If you stayed through this whole story, hit subscribe before you leave, because the chapter I haven't told you yet is the one about Christmas, 8 weeks after my parents saw the house, and what my mother said when she found Grandma Evelyn's passbook in a box of holiday things, and how the conversation that followed changed something between us that I didn't expect could be changed. You need a narrative reason to stay, not a sales pitch, and I think that chapter is worth staying for. If you grew up as the child who got the folded bill, this like is yours. Click it. Someone sees you. I started this story at a kitchen table with a greeting card and $100 and a red bow on a car that wasn't mine. I'm ending it at another kitchen table, in a house with 9-foot ceilings and a farmhouse sink, and a window looking out at a 42-year-old oak tree, with the deed filed under Claire Holloway at the county recorder's office in Licking County, Ohio. The light comes in sideways in October and falls across the quartz countertop, and it is, without qualification or caveat, mine.